What inspires me to create? I would say a great variety of things, but probably the largest is an intense and ongoing curiosity about the world around me. I describe my personal studio as a mad science art lab, and I kind of cannot describe it any other way because my creative process often involves doing a lot of different experiments, reiterating on things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, setting things on fire, and hopefully by the end of it, having something from that process. I am actually quite an interdisciplinary artist. I work in a lot of different realms. I'm both a 2D and a 3D sculptor. I really like working with paper. I like working with plastics and resins. And when I do have the chance, my favorite thing is to work in spatial installation art. I have a master's degree in installation and performance art. I also have a background in science. I find that when I discover new things or when I learn about new things or when I get invested in a process or just the idea of something, that's really what drags me along a path to exploring that. And I've been making art as long as I can remember. And the scientific side of it sort of came in later, but when it did come in, it came in very intensely. I think the most challenging aspect of creating when it comes to me personally is I get really wrapped up in the process of experimentation. And experiments are very easy to do, whereas it's not very easy to create a finished work of art. So if I'm not careful, what'll happen is that I spend a lot of time experimenting with things, and the really, really important part of the process, which is that time in which you think about the things that you're creating and you actually work out the thing that you are communicating, because as far as I'm concerned, art exists as a means of communication. It's when you get out of the experimentation phase and you get into the actual phase of, okay, so I have the techniques, what am I actually making? That part becomes very difficult for me. And that pre-production phase of it, you might call it, oftentimes lasts a lot longer than the creation phase itself does. I think of myself as making a possible scenario that sets up experiences, rather than making something that I want people to read a particular way 100% of the time. It's more like creating an environment in which an experience will happen. And what experience that is depends entirely on the person who's viewing the work. When I see other people respond to my work, I actually get a great deal of joy and feedback from seeing how people respond to that. It almost becomes like a psychological experiment for me. And I find that if people have their own experience of a piece of work, if that meaning is not prescribed to them, then they take a greater sense of personal ownership over it, because that experience is completely theirs. It belongs to them. I think one of the biggest things that this residency has helped me with in terms of growth and development is actually interacting with the public. I don't find it to be the easiest thing to put myself out there in in-person situations, but I think that one of the things that it really helped with was just that idea of making myself available in other ways, which is just as important when you're talking about being an artist as learning a new technique or coming up with a new method of things, which, to be fair, I did come up with some new methods of things that I'm very excited about. I started some artwork that is going to be in development, and I'm very pleased about that. But the biggest thing, I think, is that it showed me that I can put myself out there without having to physically be out there. Because of the circumstances that have been going on, what with COVID and restrictions and all, I didn't have a lot of people in the studio with me personally during my residency, but that doesn't mean that I didn't get to interact with people. I did offer open studio hours via streaming. It was really nice to be able to interact with people, some of whom are all the way on the other side of the world, and be able to bring that experience of being in the studio with me, of seeing and experiencing the wonderful studio they have here, and to be able to do that regularly. It was fun. It was a lot of fun for a number of people. So the work I create is very heavily influenced by pop art. I consider myself to be a pop artist, but I also like to touch on or deal with certain darker aspects of existence. My work often has a focus on the subject of death. And for me, that's partly because at one point in my life, in my early 20s, I experienced a fairly intense string of serious deaths of people who were close to me. And I found that prior to that point, I had been completely unprepared to deal with that. And so it ended up influencing my work quite a bit. But at the same time, I believe that human beings learn via the process of play. We experience the world through play, we learn through play, and we learn to cope with the world through play. So a lot of the work that I make ends up trying to be sort of a synthesis of those very dark things about the world, but with a playfulness in order to make them palatable and understandable. I think overall, this residency has been a wonderful opportunity, and I've gotten to meet with and work with wonderful people who have been very patient with me because I always have a million billion things going on, and they've just been very glad to work with me. And I think that this has been a wonderful experience.